I got a great deal on a Thule Helium Platform XT2 hitch when I was on vacation. But when I got home and went to mount my bikes on it, I realized the fenders and racks on most of our bikes were incompatible. So I ended up buying a Kuat NV Base 2.0 to replace it. Owning the two racks, however, gave me the opportunity to compare them head to head. Starting with the Thule Helium Platform XT, it holds two bikes and was retailing for about $10.49 in Canadian dollars, but it looks like they dropped the price this year to around $900 and about $700 US. It's built to fit a 1 1/4 inch receiver, but it comes with an adapter which makes it fit a 2-inch receiver as well. Some assembly is required with the Helium, but it comes with the required Allen key and the whole process was quick and relatively painless. Once it's put together, everything feels very solid. With the rack assembled, it's time to mount it on the car, and this is the first notable feature I really like on the Thule Helium. The rack has what they call the stinger, which replaces the pin that you usually insert to hold the drawbar for a trailer hitch in place. It provides a quick way of keeping the rack from sliding out of the receiver accidentally. Then, it has an offset piece at the end of that drawbar, which you tighten to keep the drawbar from wiggling when the rack is loaded and the car is in motion. This works really well, so the rack feels very firmly attached to the vehicle with virtually no wiggle. Most hitch racks rely on a drawbar pin and lock to keep someone from pulling the pin and removing the whole rack and bikes from the vehicle. The Helium Platform XT uses the stinger as a fail-safe measure to make sure the rack doesn't fall off, but has a more convenient approach for locking the rack to the vehicle. The handle, which tightens the drawbar into the receiver, has a key lock, so that when you remove the key, the handle simply spins freely. That means that without the key, you can't loosen the drawbar, so you can't remove it. Another thing I really like about this hitch is the location of that tightening knob. It's located high enough that you're unlikely to ever scrape it on the ground, even if you go over a curb or transition from a steep driveway onto the road. When not in use, the Helium Platform XT folds up nicely against the back of your vehicle. It doesn't stick out excessively far, so it's not too inconvenient to leave on your vehicle, and it's easy to fold down when you want to use it. Just squeeze the handle at the top and lower it down. Once down, it locks in place with a very firm click, and similarly flips up and locks in place easily. The position of this handle is convenient to reach whether it's up or down. The arms which hold the wheels and keep the bikes on the rack open easily by squeezing the lever in the handle and pulling up. This releases the locking mechanism on the track, which allows the arms to open. That all works really well, unless you try to mount a bike that has fenders or pannier racks on it, or both. You can see here that locking in the front wheel isn't a problem because the fender is mostly out of the way. But when it comes to the back wheel, we ran into problems. The back clamp is tightening down onto the fender. While this might hold sufficiently for a short trip on smooth roads, I'm not sure I want to take the risk of doing any significant travel this way. I don't know that this would be a recommended way of mounting a bike. So, that rules this rack out for my needs, but in the interest of giving the rack a fair review, I grabbed my daughter's road bike to see how it would mount. Needless to say, the process is quick and painless. It takes just seconds, and the road bike is firmly mounted on the rack. For those of you with station wagons or SUVs, the need to get into the back hatch doesn't go away just because you're carrying bikes. But luckily, Thule has thought of this and have an elegant way of addressing this problem. The handle you squeeze to flip the rack up and out of the way when it's empty also allows you to lower the rack down slightly to give clearance to the hatch when you've got bikes mounted on the rack. Once the hatch is closed, the process is easily reversed and the rack lifts up and locks firmly back into place. Removing a bike from the rack is a quick process of releasing both wheels by squeezing the handle clamps so you can lift off the bike. Once the bike's removed, it's very quick to fold down the arms and flip the rack up into storage position. The one feature I haven't shown yet is the integrated locks. There are locking cables which are stored in the wheel platforms, one for each bike. I found them a little finicky to use, not overly inspiring at a security level, and I would have liked a little more cable to work with when I'm trying to lock bikes. In fairness, I find that most integrated locking systems for hitch racks aren't particularly robust, but I found this one to be a little less than industry leading, which is surprising coming from Thule on an otherwise excellent rack. The final step in this review is removal of the rack from the vehicle, and this is super easy. You lock the handle so that it won't spin freely, and then loosen the drawbar. With the drawbar loose, you pull the stinger pin and lift the rack drawbar out of the receiver. The beauty of this rack is that because it's made of a lot of aluminum, at about 45 pounds, it's significantly lighter than many comparable racks, which makes moving and storing it a little more pleasant than its heavier competitors. Overall, this is a great rack. It's easy to install, remove, and use. It attaches firmly to your vehicle, and the bikes are held firmly in place. The only drawbacks, as far as I'm concerned, are that it can't securely hold bikes with fenders or pannier racks, and the cable locks are a little short. They're maybe not the greatest. But apart from those issues, this rack is a winner. I was disappointed that it didn't work for my use case because I would have kept it otherwise. So that brings me to the Kuat NV Base 2. It's priced pretty much at the same $1049 price point in Canada. The primary functional difference between it and the Thule Helium Platform XT2 is that it uses a strap to hold down the back wheel, so it doesn't interfere with the fenders or pannier racks. That makes it a candidate for my use case. Mounting the rack on the car is fairly straightforward. You slide the drawbar of the rack into the receiver of your car, then you turn the handle which tightens the drawbar into the receiver. It does this by jamming a steel ball tightly against the inside of the receiver, as you can see here. With the handle fully tightened, the rack is quite firm, but you can see that giving the rack a shake does result in some movement within the receiver. I was initially concerned about this amount of movement, but I found that once I had the bikes mounted and went out for a drive, everything looked quite stable. One concern I have is the way the tightening knob sticks out. It makes it easy to tighten, which is good, but it also looks vulnerable to damage if you come out of a steep driveway or encounter a high curb when backing up. That said, I don't think it's a major concern if you pay attention when you're driving in tight situations. To lock the rack onto your hitch receiver, Kuat provides a steel pin with lock. It's not as elegant as the Thule solution, but it gets the job done just fine. It's consistent with what many other racks do and similar to what I use when I'm towing a trailer, so there's really no problem. The rack has a convenient lever which unlocks the rack and allows you to fold it up when it's not carrying bikes. In the folded position, it's pretty compact and doesn't stick out too far, so I don't think I'm likely to forget about it and hit something with it when I'm backing up, and it won't be in the way too much if I leave it on the car when I'm not carrying bikes. Kuat has designed the rack to be ready for just about any size wheel you're going to throw at it. The back wheel sits on a slightly curved deck that is held in place with a locking strap, while the front wheel has a saddle that's designed to accommodate different tire widths from a road bike all the way up to fat tire. When it comes to mounting bikes, the process is straightforward. The front wheels are held in place by these arms which telescope easily with the press of a conveniently placed button and then lock tight when you press down on them. The back wheels lock down with straps that lock into place and easily released with the press of a button. The bike feels firm when it's tightened down. It's not as tight as when I use a roof rack and remove the front wheels so that the forks lock onto the rack, but the bike feels suitably firm. It's not going to come loose and fall off, and it's not going to move around so much that it gets damaged. Mounting a second bike goes equally easily, of course. They face in opposite directions so you don't have handlebars battling for space. You can see here that the arms that lock the wheels have plenty of room to get around the shocks on my mountain bike. With two bikes mounted on the rack, you still have the ability to get into your back hatch, which is really important if you're driving a wagon or an SUV. With the pull of a lever, the rack releases and swings down out of the way so that your hatch can open and make the cargo space accessible. With two bikes mounted, there's a bit of weight to manage as you lower the bikes down, but it's the same issue with other racks as well. Putting the bikes back up just means lifting the rack up and it clicks firmly back into place. If you're going to be leaving your bikes unattended and want a little theft deterrence, there are integrated cable locks. The cables store inside the back wheel platform and are long enough to reach the frame of the bike. Integrated locks like these will really just slow down a motivated thief, but these are relatively easy to use and are long enough that they're not too difficult to work with. Unlocking the bikes and storing the lock cables is as easy as getting them out. My only complaint is that the plastic cap that protects the keyhole can be a little finicky to remove, but that's not a major quibble, and it probably goes away once you've used it for a little bit. Removing the bikes from the rack just means reversing the process, unstrapping the back wheels, pulling up on the front wheel lock arm, and lifting the bikes off the rack. Once the bikes have been removed, the rack folds up against the back of the vehicle. Overall, I really like the Kuat NV-Base 2.0. Its build quality is excellent and it's easy to assemble and easy to mount on the car. It can handle a wide variety of tire widths, and it gets bonus points for the fact that it can mount bikes with back fenders and pannier racks. The mechanism for tightening the drawbar into the receiver does an acceptable job of keeping the rack and bikes from rattling around. Loading up the bikes is easy and results in the bikes being firmly mounted on the rack, which of course is the #1 priority. It conveniently folds out of the way when necessary and folds down when you have bikes on the rack and need access to your vehicle cargo space. The integrated locks are sufficient as a mild theft deterrent. The primary drawback for this rack is that it's heavy at around 60 pounds, which makes it a bit awkward for mounting, removing, and storage. You also have to buy the rack that fits your specific receiver. You either buy a rack for a 2-inch drawbar or for a 1¼ inch drawbar. If you have two vehicles with different drawbar sizes, you're going to be buying two racks. So, how do you choose between these two racks? Both are excellent. I like the Helium Platform XT's method for tightening the drawbar into the hitch receiver. It results in the firmest possible mount, but the Kuat is more than acceptable in this area, so I wouldn't make that the deciding factor. The Thule also has the advantage that it has an adapter so that it can be used with either a 1¼ or 2-inch receiver. The Helium also has a weight advantage by being about 15 pounds lighter, but the bike's mounted more firmly on the Kuat. The integrated bike locks were also a little easier to use on the Kuat as they were a little bit longer. When I started this review, the two racks were priced almost identically, but it looks like the Thule lowered their price, and I don't know if Kuat is going to match, so there could be a price advantage for Thule as well, but check your local bike shop for current pricing. Final advantage for Kuat is that it could handle bikes with fenders and pannier racks, which was a make-or-break feature for me. You won't go wrong with either of these racks. Each have their advantages and disadvantages, but both are top quality solutions for carrying two bikes.